There are places that exist outside of our reality. Strange dimensions ruled by different beings incomprehensible to humans. Imagine these as intertwined threads within our fabric of reality, where sometimes they may pierce in and spill over to a certain degree. I'm sure some of you would have heard of liminal spaces, transitional settings, paused in time and hauntingly empty, evoking a feeling of hollowness and dread deep in your gut. Schools at night, long winding empty hallways and large indoor playgrounds with dim lighting. These liminal spaces are sometimes the sites at which these rips in reality take place, allowing the outer dimensions to slip in. It's a subtle change at first, barely noticeable until these places transition into their own madness. I work for an international company that monitors and, if necessary, seals these rips in reality. Oftentimes, we target abandoned places that don't receive any human contact or conscious thought, such as an abandoned office building or long out-of-use underground train station. These places are at high risk of succumbing to the outer dimensions because they are forgotten and alienated, allowing the manifestation of extra-dimensional beings. Out of the many different departments and sectors in the company, I work in the on-site containment sector, where trained personnel are the last line of defense against an identified high-risk anomaly. I've been on the job for most of my life and just recently retired. Throughout my career, I've seen things from downright horrifying to utterly nonsensical, and it's weighed down on me. I'm sharing my experiences here as a record of my career, and also as a way to lift some of the burdens of my experiences. As is fitting, I'm going to start with my very first encounter, the abandoned McDonald's in the middle of the Australian outback. I stared out the car window as the rust-red expanse of the desert passed by, occasionally interrupted by a muted low shrub. My partner Dan had both his hands on the wheel, scanning the sides of the road for our target. It was standard protocol to have two agents on a mission, with one of them a more experienced member if there is a newer member present. You're probably wondering why we don't send larger groups so we can properly handle the situation. But it runs the risk of greatly disturbing and destabilizing the anomaly. Two people has been on multiple occasions found to be the ideal number, with most operations going successfully given that the agents don't make a big mistake. Dan was several years older than me and wasn't much of a talkative guy, so much of the road trip here was spent in agonizing silence. And by much of the road trip I mean 3 hours. I had tried to turn on the radio at the 30-minute mark, but he had promptly whacked my hand away, saying that we needed to be alert. The guy was on edge even though we were miles away from the actual site. In another few minutes we finally came to the site, an old abandoned McDonald's building that had last been used in the 60 seconds when this road was the sole path to a now long forgotten tourist town. Dan parked the car there, just on the side of the road, not even entering the parking lot of the building. It was a safe move and one I wouldn't have thought of. But again, this was my first ever mission. As usual, Dan stepped out of the car and scanned the area before instructing me to grab the backpacks and follow him to the restaurant. The backpacks were courtesy of Limsec, packed with standard military-type survival gear, and also some special items needed to work in liminal spaces and alternate dimensions. The air was dry and hot, searing my skin like I was a potato being cooked inside an oven. Stepping out of the car, the sun felt like it pierced my skin even more. Dan had already walked over into the parking lot and was now looking at the building as if it was about to explode at any point. When I came over, Dan grabbed his backpack and then immediately started to point out the absurdities in the building. The first one was obvious and unsettled me a little. The fluorescent lights inside the building were flickering. Keep in mind that this place had been disconnected from the power grid over 50 years ago. Just that fact alone made my heart beat a little faster with anticipation of the supernatural. The rest were rather subtle, the spaces being a little too narrow in the parking lot, the overflowing rubbish bin at the entrance, and the completely clean exterior. One could not have deduced that the restaurant was abandoned at first glance. Let's get this done quick. I've got a bad feeling, Dan whispered and started to walk towards the glass doors. He pushed them open and let me in before placing a door stopper under the door to prevent it from closing us in the place. You might have imagined the doors creaking. or all furniture inside the restaurant being caked in dust. But that was not the case. The interior was clean and typical of a standard McDonald's store, complete with red chairs and thin wooden tables. Then I started to notice more absurdity: the two drinks on a table in a corner, with their straws oriented towards the chairs as if a couple had been sitting there drinking them moments ago. And even worse, a pile of crumpled tissues arranged in a crude pyramid with a small Ronald McDonald clown figurine staring right at me on another table. Dan had already pulled out an anomaly detector, which measured particle and energy disturbance in the area. Think of it as a radiation detector, but for detecting faults in reality. It was beeping steadily, indicating that we had definitely come to the right place. Not that it wasn't already obvious. The goal was to find the center of the anomaly, a zero point at which the exact disturbance had occurred, and to then seal the gap using our equipment. The process is usually simple for most places as long as the space isn't disturbed. As we cautiously surveyed the area, eyes on the detector to find that peak disturbance point, I started to hear a humming sound coming from behind the counters somewhere in the kitchen. I pointed it out to Dan, and he confirmed he heard it too, so we started to approach the kitchen. I gasped when I finally saw the source of the sound and the scene in front of me. Inside the kitchen on the counter was an old CRT TV playing static. Beyond the TV, the kitchen environment seamlessly merged with some sort of open-plan office, complete with cubicles and computers. As we walked closer to the TV, the anomaly detector started to beep like crazy. I could see the transition from kitchen to office much better now, and it was a very sharp transition, like someone had sliced out part of an office and placed it there. Looking at where the tiles suddenly gave way to the blue office carpet, there was a slight fuzziness, something which my eyes physically couldn't focus on. Dan stopped me just as I was about to walk over the transition and into the office space by abruptly grabbing my shoulder. "There's no need to go there. This TV is the source," he whispered as he set down his backpack on the counter and pulled out a pair of wire cutters. With it, he cut the cable to the TV that disappeared somewhere into the wall. As expected, the TV immediately turned off. An eerie silence set down upon us, weighing on our shoulders, and I had this instinctual feeling that cutting the cord was a mistake. I looked over at Dan and could tell he felt the same, although he was keeping it together, sticking to protocol, and now attaching our devices to the TV to neutralize it. "2 more minutes and then we'll wrap this up and take it out," he told me as he stuck on a device with a screen. In a way, it looked like an expensive bomb. I couldn't tell you how the technology worked. I still don't understand any of the scientific details about these anomalies or spaces. It was all going smoothly until the buzzing sound started up again, more intensely than before, and this time it wasn't from the TV. Dan snapped his head around trying to locate the source of the sound, but it seemed to be all around us. My stomach sunk as adrenaline coursed its way through my jittery legs. It was coming closer now, closing in on us, and suddenly from behind the counter it rose. The creature was made of static in a humanoid shape, its whole body a kaleidoscope of sizzling black and white shapes. I couldn't make out the edges of its body, and its movement made it seem like it was gliding through the air. With my heart in my throat, Dan grabbed my arm and screamed at me to move. With nowhere else to go, we ran into office space past the kitchen, running around the cubicles to hide from the monster. We did have some weapons on us, but they were superficial at dealing with this sort of stuff at best. It's like shooting at a T-Rex with a pistol instead of running away. You go to the left. I'll go to the right. Keep an eye on your radio," Dan yelled quickly. I listened and took a turn left. The open office space seemed to expand forever, the cubicle layout forming a nonsensical maze with various turns and corners. Each cubicle was the exact same, a black monitor accompanied by a keyboard and mouse, with the keyboard upon closer inspection lacking any labels on the keys. There was a lack of personal items and no chairs were present at all, with the carpet leaving a wet smack as I took each step. I realized that I could no longer hear the static buzz of the entity that had been chasing us, and I slowed to a stop in the middle of the space somewhere amongst the endless cubicles. The feeling of isolation resonated in my gut as I looked around with the overhead lights flickering ever so slightly. The whole place smelled like ashes while simultaneously having a moist, musty smell like soil after rain. I now realized that Dan had most likely distracted the entity from me and led it with him. Both were still somewhere here. I pulled my radio out of my pocket, a small discreet black unit outfitted with a special receiver and transmitter, and flicked it on. Dan, can you copy? I called into the radio. After this, I clipped the radio onto my belt and started to think about how I could navigate out of here. I still had my own Limsec backpack on me, so I wasn't completely cast away. However, the only issue with being this far into the anomaly was that it would change and morph around me, making navigation back nearly impossible. Still, I had an identical detector similar to Dan's that would guide me to an exit point. It might be in the same McDonald's that we came in from if I'm lucky, or it could be on the other side of the world. But that was another issue. I walked around aimlessly when I noticed the wall of darkness. It was present in the distance everywhere, surrounding me entirely. It was like I was inside a video game and the rendered distance was set very low. And as I looked closer at it, it appeared to be coming closer. Very quickly. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that I needed to get the hell out of here with this black curtain consuming everything. The circle of black continued to close in on me as I desperately ran around the place trying to look for some sort of exit, some sort of discontinuity that I could exploit. Each cubicle offered no help like the one before it, and my hope was beginning to run out. That's when I came across the door. It stood in the middle of an open space between cubicles leading nowhere. It was made of wood, decorated by carved flourishing patterns. It didn't seem to belong in the space, seeming more fit for a luxurious mansion. The rule was drilled into us during our training: do not open doors under any circumstances. But this was a different circumstance. The space was collapsing in on me in each passing second, the wall of black coming closer, and this door was my last resort. Logically, I knew that it would lead nowhere because there was nothing on the other side, but it was also my last hope. I put my hand on the handle, feeling its cold metallic touch, and turned carefully. The door swung open inwards, revealing some sort of classroom. I now had two options: stay here and potentially get erased from reality, or have a chance to escape from this dimension by going through the door. I thought briefly about Dan and wondered where he was, feeling a pang of guilt as I slipped through the door and closed it behind me. Everything in the classroom was slightly oversized. It was so subtle that if I wasn't actively looking for anything out of place, I wouldn't have noticed it. Ordinary rows of single tables and chairs neatly filled out the room, with a chalkboard at the front accompanied by a larger teacher's desk. Written on the chalkboard was a nonsensical phrase: all students must calculate the heat death of the universe. The handwriting was familiar and very neat, resembling a font I couldn't place. I started to walk to the front of the room after spotting an exit door. I had already broken the door rule once, so it didn't hurt to break it twice. I noticed a sickening effect as I walked on further. The whole room seemed to scale up in size simultaneously. It was as if my body was shrinking with each forward step. I froze as I noticed this and took 2 slow steps forward again. The whole room and everything within it grew larger proportionally. The desks were starting to reach my shoulders now, and the whole thing was extremely disorienting. Actively evolving spaces were a bad sign, as was drilled in my training, and I needed to get out of here, or getting back home would very quickly become the least of my concerns. I really wasn't sure what to do, so I decided I would run quickly to get to the exit door I could see at the front of the room. I started to run, and the room grew larger at a dizzying speed. It messed with my perception of depth and balance, causing me to trip on myself and come crashing to the ground. The desks were now taller than me, and the exit door was double my size. The writing on the chalkboard had changed. Failure in this examination will result in the loss of the gallbladder. The words were deeply disturbing in their own right despite barely making sense, and I started to feel like I was going to throw up. Crouched on the floor there, I spotted a hole to my right under a desk. When I say hole, I mean it. It was a circle of darkness. I had no idea where it led, but I had a deep feeling that I wasn't safe in this classroom. And when I started to hear heavy thundering footsteps approaching from somewhere behind me, I had no choice but to jump into that hole. Coming out of the hole was a weird transition. Imagine falling into something but then somehow stepping out in another place. The whole orientation of up, down, left and right seemed to flip as I fell through that hole. And yet, the transition was seamless, like blinking your eyes. I now found myself in some sort of theater. The proportions of size were to my relief correct. However, the place was dark, and after my eyes had adjusted to it, I could see the rough outlines of rows of chairs. The large screen displayed a single message in similar font to the handwriting on the chalkboard. Walls breathed, but there was no air. I ignored it, walking around the place trying to find some sort of exit when I finally spotted another TV. It was propped up on a chair in the front row, almost identical to the one we had found at the McDonald's. It also played the same static. Recurring symbols were a strong indicator of exits and entrances. I felt extreme relief as I spotted the TV, but then my thoughts reached to Dan. I had no idea where he was, and he definitely hadn't responded on the radio. Just as I was pondering this, I saw a figure in the distance. Thoughts crossed my mind, from horrifying to pleasant. I pulled a small torch out of my pocket and turned it on so I could better see whatever the figure was. The light illuminated Dan's face, but it was all wrong. His eyes were a deep red and his cheeks were streaked with blood-red tears. He called out to me in a broken voice, like some of his vocal cords had been clawed out before collapsing on the floor. "Help me." The hairs on the back of my neck were standing and a cold sweat erupted all over my body. I had only met Dan a couple of days ago, but I still couldn't abandon him in this place. At the same time, this could just be a trick that the space was playing on me, luring me in like prey. I was torn between the two options at this point, and within a split second, I took a decision that I still rethink to this day. I abandoned Dan and rushed for the TV, running my hand across the screen. A flash of light blinded me as I found myself back at the abandoned McDonald's right in the kitchen. The same office space expanded in front of me. I also noticed that Dan had left his entire backpack on the counter. Picking up his backpack, I ran outside of the place and right into the car. The car seemed to have worn down under the heat of the sun, and when I started it up, I couldn't believe the date that was displayed on the dashboard. 1 week had passed in what I perceived as a few hours at most. Dan was nowhere to be found after the mission, and I was sent back for retraining and stayed away from on-site missions for quite some time. I sometimes wonder if I could have saved Dan's life. Without his gadgets and backpack, he must have had it extremely hard in that wild, unknown dimension. Regardless, I was soon back to doing on-site missions, and many went smoothly without a hitch. But across my long career, I've faced many situations and seen many things that have made me contemplate the nature of reality. The truth is that we live under false security, only protected by a thin wall from hostile exterior dimensions. Maybe I'll share a few more of my stories soon.